Hello, it's me, Reinhardt. I'm gonna be reading another story because I just now saw that I have 1.2k on my last reading fanfic video. This one, I couldn't find that story again, I'm so sorry. I don't remember the name of it, and I really should have put the name in the title, but I didn't, and now I regret that, because I know some of you guys wanted me to read further, but I couldn't find it. I'm so sorry about that. So I'm gonna read another one. It's not Airy, it's RoyEd actually. I just recently got into Fullmetal Alchemist. Please ignore my very messy hair. I've been sick lately. And I know it's been a while since I made a video, so I decided what better to do with my time than make a video. So the name of this story is To Love Your Omega. It's a RoyEd Alpha Omega thing. And I believe there's smut, so beware. If you don't like smut, go back now, okay? Alright, here we go. One of the worst things about being an Omega was that once every month when the Omega would go into heat. It was hot, uncomfortable, and embarrassing. Usually, he would stifle it enough by using depressants to hide the overwhelming sense of his need, to hide the behavioral habits. But this time, it was an especially bad phase, and even worse, he was out of depressants. Edward laid in his bed, and his bed's cocooned in sheets. It was a habit for him to make some sort of nest-like structure, almost like an instinctual preparation for a mate to come. But he knew that, for a fact, no one would actually arrive. No one had ever come for him when he needed this so desperately. Why would he even try to hope for it anymore? Blonde's face was flushed and covered in a sheet of sweat. He was also panting heavily as if he couldn't get enough of air into his lungs. He shook vigorously with the feeling of desperation that couldn't be ignored. He needed someone, anyone, to come and state his needs. Suddenly, he heard a loud banging at his door. Then he heard the voice of Colonel Roy Mustang. "Full Metal, if you don't get your ass out here right now and turn in your report, I'll break down this door and so help me and get it myself." Okay, that didn't make too much sense. Oh, yeah. Ed vaguely remembered through his desperate thoughts. He was supposed to turn in his report on his latest mission today. He's been so distracted by his heat phase, though he hadn't even started it yet. He didn't respond to the man, and after a few minutes, he heard the sound of a creak as his door was swung open, the noise hidden almost totally by the ringing in his ears. It was so hot in the room, but that might just be his heat. He shook with anticipation as he smelled something that made him whimper desperately, an alpha scent. Roy was an alpha. This is what he needed. Would Roy help him or leave him like this? He hoped that Roy wouldn't leave him. When Roy had found out that the door was unlocked, he just swung it open. When the door opened, the smell of an Omega in heat hit his nose, making it wrinkle in disgust. It was a good smell. It really was. It was his favorite smell, actually. Dark chocolate. Okay. I didn't know it had a specific smell. But it was overwhelming. So overwhelming that it was to the point of being horrifically unpleasant. So, he thought, finally finding a way to think about something other than the horrid strength of the smell. Ed's an Omega. He followed the set into the apartment and into Edward's bedroom, pushing the door open as he was attacked by an even more overwhelming onslaught of the smell. It was worse in here. Way worse. He coughed quietly, choking on the smell till he adapted to it. And then caught sight of Ed laying in his bed, red, panting, and shaking visibly. He was nestled into the homemade nest of sheets and blankets on his bed. Roy could hear the quiet, desperate whimpers coming from the boy. Roy's cock jumped. Oh no. Roy's cock jumped at the sight of the blonde like this. So weak. So vulnerable. He stalked over to the boy in a predatory way, letting his animalistic instincts take over his actions. He climbed on top of Ed, pinning his wrist down. At the unexpected movements, Ed cracked his eyes open, probably the only thing he could imagine to do in this state of weakness. "Colonel?" he stuttered, seemingly surprised to find the man on top of him. "What are you doing?" "Shh." The man hushed him gently, but firmly in response. "Just stay quiet." The man moved his lips down to Edward's neck and began lightly nipping and sucking on the soft, tender skin just below the boy's jawbone. Ed shuddered and whimpered at the contact. Roy then unexpectedly bit down on the delicate skin, marking the boy as his own. He made sure that the bite was deep enough that it would leave a permanent scar on the blonde's neck. When the flare of pain from the bite throughout waves in Edward's neck, he cried out. His breathing sped up to an even faster pace due to the excitement coursing through his body. Roy lapped at the small beads of blood that were forming from the cuts in the boy's skin made by his teeth. Ed winced ever so slightly every time Roy's tongue made contact with the medium-sized wound. He moved his hand down to rip the boy's shirt off, popping the buttons as he did so. Ed squirmed in pleasure as the man trailed his hands down the blonde's chest. That is, until Roy growled. "Stay still," he ordered firmly, and Ed stilled his movements, down to only a strong tremble caused by the pleasure of being to his sensitive body. Being the Omega in this situation, Ed had obeyed every order given to him by Roy. If that meant he had to stop moving, he would. He was submissive while Roy was dominant. It was just how it worked. Roy's hands traveled down Edward's pants, yanking them off and pulling off his boxers with them, exposing Ed's body to the man. He left the boy completely nude in front of him. Roy licked his lips, looking the boy up and down, taking in everything about his body. The boy looked absolutely delicious. Edward whimpered desperately, reminding Roy of the boy's needs. "Please?" he begged quietly, and Roy's cock had gotten more and more hard as he'd been undressing the boy, which was practically begging for release. "Shh," the dark-haired man soothed down the blonde's hair. He'd promised himself long ago that when he finally found a mate, he would never hurt him or her. Even though the Omegas were the caretakers, the ones who neutered and raised. An Alpha was in charge of protecting his or her family. That included protecting the Omega from himself, the Alpha as well. Ed tilted his head back, pressing his head up against Roy's hand, nudging it, relishing the gentle touch of the dark-haired man's hand. When the Alpha pulled his hand away, he finally undid his own pants, letting his own erection spring free of its confinement. Edward possibly, but naturally knowing what to do, rolled on his hands and knees, and as he spread his legs wide apart, his entrance already moist. Oh no. No, shoo, get out. He spread his legs wide apart, his entrance already moistened with the fluids produced by an Omega in heat. A very helpful thing for the Omega, since most Alphas couldn't bother with using lube. Oh god. Roy used this natural lubrication to start preparing the boy for the mating ritual they would perform. Ritual? Okay. So it's a ritual now, guys. He used his fingers, easing his index finger into the blonde, who in turn whined pleasurably and also in slight pain at the feeling. Roy began to slowly move his finger in a thrusting motion, faster and faster until he added another finger, his middle finger, and scissored Ed. "What are you doing? Shoo, you little boy!" Stretching him until he deemed his small blonde mate ready. As he pulled his fingers out, he hooked them, accidentally grazing against that spot that made Ed cry out in pleasure and shake so much that he was practically vibrating. The man grinned triumphantly as he memorized the spot for later reference as he positioned himself at the boy's entrance. He slowly eased into the blonde, who whimpered as he was stretched. The man groaned loudly. The blonde was so tight. Little by little, Roy eased into Ed until he was totally seized inside the blonde. He waited for what seemed like an eternity until Ed finally relaxed himself, getting used to the pain of the stretch. Roy began moving. He tried different angles in an attempt to find that little bundle of nerves that would make his mate scream. He went faster and harder, in which each thrust he finally hit that special spot, making Edward cry out loudly in pleasure. He focused on that spot from then on, pounding into it violently, overwhelming Ed with a sensation that felt so good it almost hurt him. Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Roy draped himself over Ed as he continued to thrust, and sucked the skin on the side of his neck. He scraped his teeth along the soft skin, making his golden-headed mate whimper and whine. "You're mine," he growled possessively. "You understand? You're mine. No one else can have you. Do you understand?" Ed whimpered at this, at his alpha's possessive and dominating tone, and nodded vigorously. Satisfied with knowing that the blonde knew who he belonged to, Roy nipped his neck one last time, leaving a small little love mark, not nearly as big or as permanent as Roy's large bite mark that marked the boy as his and his only. The time went on, and Roy felt his cock swelling at the base into a knot. It started to get more and more difficult to move inside his little blonde mate. His thrust became stronger as he tried to fight the restrictions, but upon hearing Ed whimper in pain instead of pleasure, made him remember his promise, and it made him stop his attempts at fighting the knot. Soon the knot became such a large size that Roy could no longer move at all, and the two were locked together. On his last thrust he actually had forced in it, Roy released inside the boy, and Ed spattered his own seed over the sheets under him and parts of his stomach that the cum could reach. After his release, Roy's thrust became more and more small and more weak until he was totally immobile. When he was finally still, the older of the two wrapped his arms around the younger, pulling him down so they were laying in their sides of the bed. He managed not to move without difficulty and to get into at least semi-comfortable position. Oh gosh. "Colonel," Ed started nervously, but Roy shushed him. "Shh." He stroked the blonde's hair soothingly. "Don't say anything. Just relax, and we'll talk in the morning." Ed nodded obediently and closed his eyes. Roy shifted a little and smiled. Oh gosh. He looked at the small little blonde mate and... What? Crap. I just lost my spot. Hold on, guys. I just lost it. Hold on. Okay. He looked at his little small blonde mate and kissed the top of his head, and then let a relaxed sigh, letting his worries out. Oh my god, I can't read all of a sudden. Roy then let out a relaxed sigh. His worries about how he might or might not treat Ed go, letting his worries about how he might or might not treat Ed go, and after a while he finally fell asleep next to Edward, wrapped in the nest of sheets and blankets that Ed had made, dreaming of what a future with Ed as a mate would be planned about for him. That is everything for chapter 1. Okay, I'll read chapter 2 to you guys next video, because I don't know how much storage I have on my phone for this, and it's already 13 minutes. So thanks for watching. I'm glad you guys like me reading smut out loud to you guys, despite how I can get in so much trouble for doing this. So I probably won't do this too often, so you're going to be waiting months at a time. But I'm glad you guys liked. And I'm probably going to do other stupid shit. I'm glad you guys like me reading smut to you, and not anything else that I can do. So, thank you. And I want to warn you now, not everything I'm going to read is probably going to be smutty. Though probably most of it will be, because that's just what I do. So, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next video.